Brary was a horse breeder. So he had that, not only did he have that political charisma, but he had that charisma that goes with the horse industry and horse trader. And, let's do a deal. Let's figure out how to make this go. Brary was his nickname. So we're sitting at dinner and we're $250,000 apart on the price. And he gets a quarter out of his pocket and says, let's flip for it. Says this to the guy. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. What? We're flipping a coin for $250,000? So the other guy sits there and he said, all right, well, his wife was just so offended. She said, we're absolutely not going to flip a coin for, these are good people and we've worked hard on these stations. And we almost lost the deal. And we're walking across the parking lot and he looks at me and goes, I know, you won't invite me back to one of these again because of the coin flip. And I said, they're not horse traders, Brary, they're radio stations.
Benztown President Dave Chachi Dennis loves radio and all of his radio friends.
Hey, Chachi.
Hey, everybody.
Because Chachi loves everybody.
I am thrilled to announce my next guest. He is a true titan of the broadcasting industry. At just 21 years old, he bought his first radio stations, marking the beginning of an extraordinary career. He went on to found a broadcast group of 35 stations, serve on the board of the National Association of Broadcasters, and held the prestigious position of Executive Vice President of Industry Affairs and Strategic Planning for the NAB. He's the past president of the Kentucky Broadcasters Association, a proud member of their Hall of Fame. His exceptional contributions have been recognized with the Distinguished Kentuckian Award and the NAB's National Radio Award, the highest leadership honor in the industry. Please welcome the founder and chairman of Commonwealth Broadcasting Corporation and the CEO of Q, Steve Newberry.
Wow. Just like it's written, Chachi. So thank you for saying all those kind words.
Sorry, I had a hard time getting through all those awards, man. That's a very impressive career.
45 years is a long time. So if you average something about once every decade, it starts adding up. But thank you. It's nice to be here.
And you started so incredibly young. I mean, you bought your first radio station literally, I think, just while you were in school. And before I get there, it was a local AM, but we'll get into some more details in a minute. Tell me a little bit about growing up in Glasgow, Kentucky.
Great small town in rural Kentucky. My dad owned a hardware store, and my mom was a school teacher, so we did not come from the radio business. The community service, community involvement was kind of our hobby. And for whatever reason, from the time I was a third grader or fourth grader with the 4-H radio show, where one Saturday a year they would let the 4-H kids come in and be on the radio, I was just addicted to radio from that point on, and I loved it. And my dad saw the owner of the local radio station at the coffee shop and said, if you ever need anybody to take out the trash or do odd jobs, my son loves radio. And but it's a great town. Those are where my roots are. As I tell people, I may travel around, but that's where they'll plant me eventually is, middle of Barron County, Kentucky. But it was a great upbringing, and it gave me an opportunity to get involved in radio at a really early age.
And were your parents, it sounds like they were pretty supportive, being your dad asked the station ownership to let you hang out?
I hit the jackpot when it came to parents. I could not have had two parents that were any more supportive. My brother's an attorney. I was on my way to law school at one point, but had an opportunity to buy that radio station, and they didn't look at me like I was crazy. They gave me full steam ahead encouragement, so I could not have asked for more.
And when you got your first gig, it was working at a station called WKAY in your hometown of Glasgow, and you worked, it looks like at the beginning, as an on-air talent.
Oh, yeah. Talent is, as I said to you earlier, talent is an operative word here that doesn't always apply. No, I was 14 years old, and my mom had to drive me to work. And the first day that I was there, I went in to train at 5 o'clock, and at 6:15, I'm on the air.
That's
I'm on
amazing.
there until 10:15 that night, and that was December 16th, 1977, and I've been doing it since then.
What was the format of the station?
A little bit of everything. It was an MOR, full service, block programming kind of radio station. And, but, the first, I guess the way I would answer that is the first song I ever played was Billy Joel, Just the Way You Are. So it was just kind of mainstream. It was a current at the time. And, it was a great full service radio station in the community.
Was your heart just like pounding out of your chest when you cracked the mic for the first time?
It was. Yeah, sure. Thank goodness there are no tapes that exist of those that first era, because I would be quite humiliated. But What I didn't have in talent at the time, I made up for with raw emotion and energy. I wanted to work there.
I always imagine as the airwaves travel off into space that, some space alien million years from now are going to hear these.
They won't be impressed with telecommunications in the United States if that's what they hear. I'll promise you.
So you go off to the University of Kentucky. You're a Wildcat. Were you a sports fan?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you're in Kentucky, you're going to be a basketball fan. That kind of comes with the territory. So I went to Kentucky, was there 80 to 84. And, as I laughingly tell my brother at times, he got a great schooling. I got a great education. So he had better grades than I did, but I learned a lot from my peers.
Well, you had to have been very entrepreneurial at a young age. I mean, you bought your first station, a 250-watt, two-tower directional daytime AM. You're in a double wide house trailer. But that takes some guts and some financing. How did you put all that together?
It takes naivete. It takes the arrogance of a 21-year-old that's worked at radio stations since he was 14. I knew everything about a radio station. People can't see my finger quotes. Didn't know anything about running a business, but I had some tenacity about it. I went to the local bank and I borrowed $125,000 with my parents co-signing. Fortunately, my family we weren't wealthy. We were very much middle class in rural America, but my parents had great character and the bank recognized that and they made it work for me. But now I know what it is to be broke, Chachi. Let me assure you, I know exactly what it is to be broke. Those were tough years.
What a remarkable story. And I mean, $125,000 in 1984 was a lot of money. That's probably the equivalent of $500,000 today, something, $400,000, $500,000.
Too much to pay for a 250-watt daytime AM and a double wide house trailer. But I made it work. And I guess I was an entrepreneur. I didn't know what that meant. Really, I knew the word, but I didn't understand what was required of that. But it was pure passion. And you know what? I've never had a radio station that I was any more proud of.
What was the format?
Full service AC. I did the morning show. I did the play-by-play. I sold all the advertising. I did most of the fix-it repair jobs around the station. If it got in the transmitter, I had to have somebody. I'm not an RF guy. But I crawled around on the floor with punch blocks and turntables and cart machines. And, we just did whatever we needed to do or could do. Covered Christmas parades. I've broadcast about everything under the sun because if there was a way to be connected to the community and try to make a little money, that's what I was doing.
I find that really inspirational, and I hope that we've got some, young people listening to this. Just, the idea that you rolled up your sleeves, no job too big, no job too small, and you're doing, virtually every aspect of the business. Are you going to school at the same time too?
No. I graduated, so I closed on the station April 2nd. I didn't want to close on April Fool's Day, so I closed on April. Seriously. It was set for April 1st, and I said, yeah, that's not a good omen. So we closed on the 2nd of 1984, and then I graduated, second week in May of 84. So for 6 weeks, I'm driving 120 miles back and forth several times a week. I do want to say something because you talk about it, and I would not wish it upon anyone, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But I had to take myself off payroll for 22 months. So I was living at home with my mom and my dad, and I keep in mind I'm 22, 23 years old. This is not very cool to be doing. And I budgeted on $25 a week. So I knew I had $5 a day to eat lunch because my mom would feed me breakfast before I left to do mornings, and then I would come home for dinner. Or if I was going out with my buddies on Saturday night, I did not want them to know how broke I was. So I would put $15 in the bottom of the drawer on Monday because I knew I could go to a movie and eat dinner for $15 in those days. And I would do it for $2 a day. And I did that. That was just the way I lived for 22 months and couldn't afford to pay myself. And we had no automation. So it was, if the station's on the air, I was having to pay somebody to be sitting in the studio. And I've had a lot of challenges. I can say with pride, I've never missed a bank payment, nor have I ever missed a payroll. So there have been times when that was a very hard record to keep going, but I've always made those two things.
I feel you as an entrepreneur, and I've been in a very similar situation in the past, and it's incredibly stressful. I think working for yourself brings a lot of freedom in a lot of ways, but it also puts on a bunch of stress that I never thought about when I worked for a corporation. And I have so much respect for entrepreneurs and people that are out there trying to build a company on their own. I can tell you too, another similarity is I still bank with the Bank of Hemet. I grew up in a small town called Hemet, and very similar to you, my parents had a relationship with the bank for many years, and they still bank. I still bank with them to this day and have a relationship of such where I can call them, and if things are tough, they always pick up the phone and they're there to help. And that's hard to find, I think, in this current environment.
It really is. Now, I did have the presence on April 2nd of this year. I called my banker, called the guy that did the loan for me. Now, the bank has been sold, and it's now part of U.S. Bank, and it's now, it's the bank that was the bank is no longer there. But the banker that did the loan and saw me through those years is now in the real estate business. But on April 2nd, I called him up and I said, you will have no idea of what you were doing 40 years ago today, but I will never forget. And I just said, thank you. Chachi, I remember going in to borrow $3,000 from him to buy cart machines because our cart machines were just shot. And I was buying 3 cart machines, $1,000 each. And I could have been borrowing $1 million. I mean, I was so hat in hand. Oh, my gosh. But, we talked about it and he said, okay, how do you think, I understand you got to have this. And he taught me an awful lot. So I've been very fortunate. I've worked hard, but man, I've had great partners and great family and great bankers, and people have really worked with me over the years to help me learn what I didn't know.
I think so much of how, at least, and I don't even want to say my success, but your success in anyone's has to do with the people around you that help.
Amen.
And
that's exactly right.
I've always had a lot of respect for you and your ability to mentor people, and we'll get into some of that in a little bit and what you did with the NAB. And I think that's so important for the industry as a whole and just humanity. You sell the station 3 years later, and you get a gig in television. My first question, did you make a profit when you sold the station, or did you sell it for a loss?
Got my money back. Now, my profit was going to be on owner financing, so I got enough money back to pay the bank off and to pay out what I owed people. And then the profit was going to be owner financing to the new owners, and that didn't work, and I never saw the money. So I got my money back. I got made whole. So there's a story, and I have not ever told this publicly, but I've told it a lot privately. Over the course of those 3 years, I borrowed about $10,000 a year from my parents. So at the end of selling that radio station, we kept a soup urn in our dining room at my parents' house, and that's where the family IOUs would go in. So if I borrowed $1,000, I'd write it down on a piece of paper. Then when I'd pay it back, I'd take it out and tear it up. So I got all those IOUs out, and it was about $30,000 worth of money that I had borrowed over the course of those 3 years. And I wrote a check back to my parents, and we're sitting at the kitchen table. And my father and mother are there, and they look at the check, and my father said, you should be very proud because you've paid back every penny that you owed us. And I know how hard you've worked because we've watched it. We helped your brother with his law degree. And I think you should think of this last 3 years, while you didn't make any money, think of it as your graduate school. And then he took the check and he tore it up. And he said, now take this $30,000 that we would have paid for you to go to graduate school and go do something with that money from what you've learned over the past 3.5 years. And that's the down payment I had on my first FM radio station.
So
I hit the jackpot.
Cool.
I hit the jackpot with parents.
That story just gave me goosebumps. Thank you for sharing that.
I've never shared that publicly. My friends know that because that was the point that I said, okay. And that's how I looked at that first station. It was graduate school.
Are your parents still with us?
No, I lost my dad in 2001 and lost my mom in late 2019. So they were older. My dad was 44 when I was born. My mom was 40. They were that greatest generation. And he was a World War II veteran and later was in the legislature in Kentucky. And she was a beloved school teacher that lost her high school sweetheart, who was killed in Germany in World War II. And then she moved to our hometown after the war and met my dad and remarried. And so they're just part of that greatest generation.
That's remarkable. Sound like wonderful people. And they were both able to see you have certainly some success, which I'm sure they're incredibly proud of.
Yeah.
When you sell the station, you pivot and go to work at a TV station in Kentucky. At that point, were you thinking about maybe moving into television instead of radio?
I got recruited by a fellow who was a very highly respected broadcaster by the name of Ralph Gabbard, who had mentored me. He was the NAB television board chair at the time. He was the first president of Gray TV. That's now Gray TV. And when they were going public, well, Ralph had recruited me to Lexington. I just thought the world of him. But unfortunately, later they were doing the road show for Gray TV. And in 1996, I guess, he died in a hotel in Boston while he was doing the road show for Gray, and passed away from a heart attack, and lost him way too early. But Ralph asked me to come to Lexington to get into the television business, and that gave me just enough taste of television to know that I wanted to be a radio guy.
It's funny. I've heard that story a few times. My first gig was at a TV radio combo in San Diego. And so I got a little bit of TV. I'd walk across the hall to check it out, but I just always gravitated towards the radio side. It was more fun, more spontaneity, more entertaining, at least for me personally. What did you do at the TV station?
I was in sales.
Okay.
I did sales and did a little bit of, I volunteered to pull cables at the football games on Saturday afternoons just because I wanted to learn the business, and did voiceovers for some spots. But yeah, I was out doing sales.
You build your first FM station. I mean, this is only 4 years out of school, 3 years out of school. So you're still incredibly young. How did you learn to even build a radio station? Did you actually get the permit and take it from the ground up?
Yeah, it was an 80-90. So I applied for it, and there was a competitive process to get the license, and I ended up buying out some folks that were there, and I got the license for a 6,000 watt FM station in Cave City, Kentucky, and put the station on the air with that money that my parents had given me to go do something else. So I took that money and reinvested. But, when you own an AM station, you figure out, okay, you need an FCC attorney, and you need a contract or a consulting engineer. And plus, I had one of my dearest friends, a guy by the name of Chuck Anderson, who employed me when I was in high school, and we've been partners. He's a fabulous consulting engineer, and he helped me figure out a lot of that stuff. And once again, if it hadn't been for the people around me helping me, I couldn't have done it. But Chuck and others helped me get that station.
Break down for me a little bit about that process. To me, it just seems so daunting. So you apply for the license. How did you identify the market, and what made you pick that area? And I'm just kind of curious. I've never done anything even close to that. And even today, it seems so daunting to me.
So it was the same town where I had the AM. So I owned the AM. And the FCC says, we're going to put an FM in this town too, but it's going to be a competitive process. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I'm sitting here starving myself to death running the AM, and you're going to create a new station and give somebody else the opportunity to come in and put that on instead of the incumbent licensee. So at first it made me nauseous and sick in my stomach, because I'm thinking, how will I ever compete?
Sure.
But I applied for it, and it was a competitive process, and you got points for being a minority, you got points for being female, you got points for having the ownership of the existing stations. And, I just wouldn't let go. I just decided I was going to keep at it, and got to the point you go through that and you get your engineering exhibits and say, here's where we put the tower if we were given the opportunity to build the station, and here's what we would program. And that's been 40 years ago, 37 years ago, but
what a wild story. So do you remember the moment when they awarded you the license?
I remember the moment when I wrote the check to the last guy to get him out of the way. It was not a moment of victory. It's a moment of, you got to be kidding me. But, you do what you got to do to get this guy. You pay his expenses, and he goes home, and you're the last guy standing.
What format did you launch it with?
It was CHR.
CHR.
So we put that station on the air. The call letters were WHHT. We did hottest hits. It was a great radio station for Southern Kentucky in 1987, 88.
I love that, man. So you're literally running a CHR station in the middle of the 80s. You're young. I mean, you're in your home state. That's got to be just an incredible feeling.
Yeah, it was kind of magical. And we had an air staff, and most of us were single. And so, Friday nights we're out in the van, and we're going out and throwing T-shirts. There's still stories about me going crazy and throwing hundreds of T-shirts out when I didn't pace myself well. I get to the first, and they're like, somebody put him back in the van because we're not going to have enough T-shirts for the next stop. But it was, It was great, and I had, again, a great air staff, great group of people that just made that so much fun, and we made it happen.
Were you on the air there as well, or were you acting more as like a general manager?
No, I was a general manager. So I did the first shift. I did take ownership, and I said, I get to do the first one. So I signed it on, but I think I did a weekend shift for a few years, but we had some really good jocks, and I just let them do what they did really well.
Did you happen to record the sign on?
No, I didn't. Maybe I did. Surely I would have, but I guess my answer is I'm not sure where that cassette tape is.
As a radio nerd, that's one of my favorite things is like listening. I loved when Scott Shannon signed on Pirate Radio here in LA, or Johnny K did Coast, and I still to this day, all that, I find that so cool to listen to. So you're doing incredibly well. You own your own radio station. You have the AM and the FM. Was it kind of instant success for you? Or, I know you struggled with the AM and that was a big learning experience, but once the FM was signed on, did it take off pretty quickly?
Yeah, it took off. It was a hot product. And, we made money. We did not make as much money as we should have. I didn't know I'd never had problems with inventory management before. I'd never had problems with rate maximization, and so this was kind of new. But the station killed it right up until the point that CHR hit when the hip hop and the grunge both showed up at the same time. So we were rolling right down the middle, playing New Kids on the Block or, New Edition and, all kinds of pop stuff. And then, that kind of presented a challenge. And ultimately we had to go AC. We kept the station. We still had the station. But it was, at the beginning, it was very successful very quickly for us.
And you still own the station to this day?
I do.
That's fantastic. A few years go by and you partner, and I hope I don't mess up his name, Breton Jones, who was a former governor of Kentucky, to form Commonwealth Broadcasting, which you still own today. And you eventually go on to build, and we'll talk about it in a second, to grow it up to 35 radio stations. Where did you, and did I say his name correctly?
It's Brereton.
Brereton,
like
okay.
Brereton, W-H-E-R-E. It rhymes with that. We just lost him within the past year.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But he was a great friend, and I saw him at a couple of events, and he said, listen, I'm getting ready to get out of the governor's office, and I want to get in the radio business. I want to do it with you. And people say things like that, and you don't go home and start, oh, man, I'm going to, And after about the third time, he said, I've mentioned this 3 times. You want to do this or not? And I said, you're serious? He said, yeah, I'm serious. So we put it together, and we grew it up to the 35 stations at one point. And after we had it for a few years, he came to me and said, listen, we're in this together. I know you're doing all the work and my name's on the shingle, but if you ever want to buy me out, I will make it really easy for you. If you want me to stay in forever, I'll stay in forever. We're in this together, but I don't want you to feel like you're working for me. And so over a period of time, I bought his shares out, and we had a great friendship forever.
Well, that's an astonishing story. Here he's the governor at the time and then the former governor, so obviously a very smart, charismatic person. And here you are, you're still in your late 20s, maybe at this point, early 30s?
Yeah, so this would have been 95. I would have been 33.
33, and he wants to form a partnership with you. That had to have been a surreal moment. Gavin Newsom has never knocked on my door wanting to invest in Benztown.
It was a surreal moment. I was at an event at the governor's mansion, and it was like his final Christmas party. And I'd known him, my brother had worked with him, and, he's a political family friend. And he said, you got a minute? I want to talk to you. And he takes me into the library at the governor's mansion, and the first contact about it was there. And then he came back a couple of more times that spring before we made it happen.
Amazing.
He was just a fine person.
And was he involved much in the operations, or did he let you handle more of the operations and he was more of a financial guy?
No, he was the financial guy. There's a famous story about, I did all the deals, but one of them was in Frankfurt. And we go to a steakhouse in Frankfort, Kentucky to talk to the husband and wife that own the radio stations there. And Brary was a horse breeder. So he had that, not only did he have that political charisma, but he had that charisma that goes with the horse industry and horse trader. And, let's do a deal and let's figure out how to make this go. Brary was his nickname. So we're sitting at dinner and we're $250,000 apart on the price. And he gets a quarter out of his pocket and says, let's flip for it. Says this to the guy. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. What? We're flipping a coin for $250,000? So the other guy sits there and he said, all right, well, his wife was just so offended. She said, we're absolutely not going to flip a coin for, these are good people and we've worked hard on these stations. And we almost lost the deal. And we're walking across the parking lot and he looks at me and goes, I know you won't invite me back to one of these again because of the coin flip. And I said, they're not horse traders, Barry, they're radio stations. So,
that sounds like something right out of a movie, man. That's unbelievable.
I've had a few movie scenes, but that would be one where, but we got the deal done and he could not have been a better partner.
When you guys were looking, when you first formed the company, do you know at that point that you wanted to keep it in Kentucky, or were you looking just where you thought that there was a good opportunity?
Where we thought there was a good opportunity. Now, this is 96. So the Telecommunications Act has just passed, and it's 93, I guess is when that happened. And so it's kind of the Wild West. So we're buying in Kentucky, going to go out. If I had anything to do over today, I've made a lot of mistakes. I hope I learn from those mistakes. But what I would have done differently is I would have made Bowling Green, Kentucky my smallest market, and I would have focused on small and mid-sized markets, the Lexington, Kentuckys, the Knoxville, Tennessees. That's where the SEC cities is where I probably, looking back, I really wish I'd gotten aggressive and gotten into those markets because you can still do the local community relationship, but it's big enough that you're not on the edge like you are with a small radio station. And so the challenge with growing Commonwealth was micro markets and small markets, you don't have a lot of room for error. And a fellow asked me one time when we were growing, he said, how do you run that many stations? I said, well, I really don't like to talk about that. He said, no, tell me. I said, well, I don't like talking about how we do it because, it's very competitive out there these days. He said, please tell me. I said, all right, I'll tell you, but please don't repeat this. Okay. I said, so the question is, how do we run that many radio stations? He said, right. I said, not very well most days, because it was, we're baler twine and duct tape trying to keep these radio stations operating in these small markets with no room for error. It was, truly, we were training one of our new staff people. This is how long ago it was. And one of my guys said, okay, get the mouse. And the guy did not know the term mouse, thought that there was a little gray critter somewhere around him, and literally jumped up thinking that we were talking about a mouse as opposed to, no, that's what this little thing with a cord coming out of it. That's how you control the computers.
When you think about that, when you're running that many radio stations, and technology was, quite a bit different than what it is today. I mean, here we're recording a podcast and we can see each other's Zoom meetings and emails and all these technologies. You can run a lot of radio stations far more technologically efficiently than you could certainly do then. And you're doing this for the first time. And once the FCC said, hey, you can own more radio stations, it wasn't like anyone had the guidebook for that.
Sure,
it was all just blazing new trails and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I wrote the book about here are the things not to do. Somebody else wrote the book for it. Lowry Mays may have written the book about here's how to do it. I've got the one on the other end of the shelf at the library. Don't do this. We had great people, but we sure skinned our knees a lot.
I think probably there was a specialness about when, your first couple radio stations and you're in there, and it's different than when all of a sudden you've got a much bigger corporation that you've got to run. Did you miss that a little bit?
Absolutely. I remember one time, it was stressful, and I remember one time where I'm just, working late, dealing with spreadsheets, dealing with finances, dealing with sales that weren't there, looking at ratios, and I just put the pen down, and I thought, man, this is not what I signed up for. But I then said, but this is what you did sign up for. This is maybe not what you thought you were getting into, but hey, I'm responsible for this decision, and I'm going to make it work, and we did.
It's really admirable what you did and what you continue to do, and certainly just at the age that you started it all, I find that so inspirational. In '99, you're elected to the NAB board, and how does that? And I've never honestly asked this question before, but when is that something you run for, or are you asked to join? How does that process work?
No, they are vacancies that are created by term limits, and so you run for the position. We had stations in Tennessee at the time, and our group was growing. I had several stations down there, and there was a vacancy on the board of directors for the radio seat for Tennessee and Arkansas. And I got a phone call from John David, my good friend John David, and he was at NAB at the time, and he said, we have a vacancy that has a few months left on the term. If you would like to fill that vacancy, we can do that. You'll have to run for election, stand for election when this term's over with. And I said, sure, I'll do it. I was elected for one term from Tennessee, Arkansas, and then another term for Kentucky, West Virginia was how the districts were. And in that period of time, I met many people that are still great friends to this day, and, served on the executive committee before I rotated off the board, was elected to the executive committee, and then was off for a couple of years, came back, and that's when I became radio board chair and joint board chair after. It was my second tour of duty on the NAB radio board and the NAB board when I ended up moving into those roles.
When you take on a big position like that, did other people on the board help mentor you as well and help show you the ropes?
Yeah, John Dilley. I don't know if you know that name, Federated Media up in Indiana. John's just a prince of a person, and John, Jenny Morris, Bill McElveen, and a lot of the folks at that time were so patient with me. But John said in a meeting one time, he said, Newberry's kind of like that old lawnmower you get that kind of gets stuck in high gear every once in a while and starts going a little faster than you want it to. But if you kick it, it slows down, and it's a pretty good lawnmower. And his point was, slow down, don't get too far ahead of it. But yeah, Eddie Fritz was a great mentor. John David was a great mentor, and so many different people. David Kennedy. I mean, golly, just some great leaders at that point in time that were so patient with this know-it-all kid from Kentucky.
And then how are you managing, because that's obviously a big time, commitment, plus you're running a group of stations. Do you have now someone over at Commonwealth that's helping you more with the day-to-day?
I do. Dale Thornhill, who you know.
Yeah.
Dale was the Sunday morning church disc jockey. He did the Sunday morning shift and played the preachers and the church services at that first station in the double-wide house trailer that we go back to.
Is that where you guys met?
Yeah. So
Amazing.
He was my Sunday morning part-timer. So he's running the group and taking care of it. And, Vicki Newberry, Darren Steenberg, and there were just a group of people that were there that while I was doing the NAB stuff, they were keeping the trains running on time, and I couldn't have done all the stuff that I was doing without them doing that stuff.
Having a team like that around you
Right.
is so instrumental. That's one of the things I've learned, is to have the right people around you and know to hire for your weaknesses. That's always tough too.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
And Dale speaks volumes about you. You and Dale still to this day work together. It's been 40 years, something like that?
Yeah, it was 40 years this fall. Jeez. And as I tell people, Dale and I have never had a crossword. We have disagreed. We've disagreed lots of times about a lot of things, but we've never had a crossword. And I told that story to somebody one time and said, that speaks an awful lot about Dale. And I said, yes, it does. So he deserves full credit for me being able to make that statement. But yes, he's an outstanding person.
You're elected in 2008 now as the chairman of the radio board for the NAB. Is that elected amongst your peers, the other board members?
It is. So there's the radio second vice chair, first vice chair. Generally, you move up through the progression. The television board has a chair, and the radio board has a chair. And they have their two individual boards. And then when you put those two together, it's a 65-person joint board of all the radio board members, all the television board members. And then if you serve as the joint board chair, if it were the Flintstones and the water buffalo, it's the guy that's got the most antlers on his hat. That's the joint board chair. And so I was radio board chair and then served 2 terms as joint board chair.
How do you, as a chair, that sounds, trying to manage a meeting of that size, and everyone has got certainly their own opinions and so forth, as they should, and I think probably to some degree their own agendas because they're coming from different broadcast group. How do you manage and lead something like that? It's probably not unlike what maybe the Speaker of the House has to do. Is it similar to that?
Hey, watch out! Don't throw me into that tar pit. I had a group of people that served with me on the executive committee. We had a great board. Had all the major groups represented, but the executive committee, Charles Warfield, who later went on to become joint board chair, Caroline Beasley, who later went on to become joint board chair, and Randy Gravely, who went on to become radio board chair. Those were my colleagues on the executive committee leadership team. And so, when you're having those conversations, what we did, we would talk about something that was something controversial, would divide the board up into thirds, and Charles would call 10 of them, and Caroline would call 10 of them, and Randy would call 10 of them, and I would communicate to the television side, and they would reach out and call theirs. It's like anything else, Chachi. If you communicate beforehand, and if you're serving from a set of values or principles or motives that you're transparent about, people may disagree with you on the position, but they don't feel like you're playing off the bottom of the deck with them. And that's how we got through some really, really tough times, because we might disagree on policy positions, but we would certainly make sure that we were candid and transparent with each other about things.
That's an amazing amount of responsibility. And you guys are setting effectively, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the agenda in a lot of ways for the NAB for both radio and for television. Yeah.
And in addition to that, we had a vacancy as the CEO. So on top of all the other stuff, we had the search committee that ended up hiring, there were a group of us on the search committee that hired Gordon Smith. So, that made us all look a lot smarter than Gordon made us all look smarter, but it was a great marriage there. So those were wonderful times that I really had an opportunity to work with, Jack Sander and Michael Fiorelli and Paul Karpowitz and Lynn Beal. The folks on the television side were just really good people to work with as well.
And you did have a former governor as a partner who I imagine would always be a good ears for some advice.
He was pretty good counsel on how to handle some of the politics that came up on this.
So you then are elected, as you mentioned, the joint board chairman. When they looked at you, were some of the TV people maybe a little bit apprehensive because your background was really solely radio, except for that 1 year of TV experience?
Well, it goes back and forth between radio and TV, but they might not have been apprehensive because of radio, but the fact I was from Glasgow, Kentucky, and I was 45, they were apprehensive. Now, fortunately, when you get into some tough battles, you form the relationships of who you can go to, who you can trust. As the phrase was, who sticks, who's going to hold tight and who's going to run. So I had that rapport with some of the TV folks that, others would say, who's this hayseed from Glasgow, Kentucky? What's he know about leading the NAB? And fortunately, my closer TV friends would say, all right, don't be fooled. He gets the big picture. And I think what I was always able to do, or at least tried to do, is I always put the good of the industry ahead of the good of me or my company. Now, people say, was that your fiduciary responsibility to Commonwealth? Yes, because if the industry is healthy, Commonwealth was going to be healthy. A particular policy might not be to our advantage in the moment, but I took lots of votes that in the short term weren't good for Commonwealth, but in the long term were good for radio. And that's how I felt that's what I felt my responsibility was. But, times are a little different these days. You got a lot more publicly traded companies. You got a lot of people that don't have the autonomy to be able to make those decisions. They got to answer to people that just want them representing the sole interest of that entity. And I understand why they're in that situation.
I would imagine that some of the people that served with you are like household names, like Mel Karmazin, people like that on the board. Yeah. I mean, who were the guys that owned Cap Cities? I don't remember their name, but I remember reading about them in a couple books.
Well, Cap Cities, that kind of came out of the ABC group, and most of those had faded. So by the time I came around, it was Lou Dickey and Mark Mays and Randall Mays and Mel Karmazin, and Mel actually pulled out of membership, but Dan Mason was, involved there. Ed Christian, Russ Withers, Jeff Smulyan, it's like murderer's row. And then on the TV side, you had these guys that were, it's Hearst and it's Post and it's, all these different groups, Meredith, all these different groups. And it's like, and we're all, self-included, type A's.
Sure.
So, yeah, let's get everybody's just a little smarter, Steve included, by the way. We're all just a little smarter than the other guys. And so you just have to have a lot of trust with each other.
And you obviously were very good at it to get elected as the chairman and then the joint board chairman. Incredibly impressive. And we could probably do a whole other podcast just on some of those stories. In 2015, you formed Newberry Advisors, which is a lobbying advocacy group working from D.C. And some of your clients included the NAB, EMF, K-Love, and Xperi. Fill me in and kind of walk me through what you did. And now it seems like you're in D.C. You're obviously spending a lot of time because of your NAB responsibilities. But now are you in D.C. full time at this juncture?
So I went back to Kentucky after leaving the radio board, and Gordon Smith called me one day and said, "You need to come to D.C. We could really use you as, the voice, the broadcaster, the small market broadcaster." And my son was a junior in high school at the time. I said, "Gordon, I appreciate it. I love the idea, but I just can't at this point uproot his life." And he said, "Well, come up and be a consultant and I'll be your first client." And I said, "Well, okay, if you're serious about that." So NAB became my first client, and then Mike Novak at EMF, he and I had a conversation, then Joe D'Angelo at Xperi. I had the Kentucky Broadcasters and another company that was doing that was in the radio sector on some technology. And it just took off like a rocket. I loved it. It's the most enjoyable. I love radio, but it was great because I was in D.C. 3 to 4 days a week, back in Kentucky for long weekends. When Congress wasn't in session, I didn't have to be in D.C. My clients were great people to work with. They paid on time. It was a great situation to be in, and was enjoying that. But then NAB was doing some reorganization, as most entities seem to have to do these days more and more often. And they had 4 different departments: membership and education and radio and television, that they wanted to put into one, as opposed to having 4 different individual departments. They wanted to consolidate that into industry affairs. And Gordon and Chris Ornelas came to me and said, "Would you do this?" So they were my biggest client. And I thought, I really like this independence, but I don't know how long, if they reorganize, I don't know how long they're going to need me to be a consultant. So I made the decision to go to NAB as a full-time employee as the EVP for that.
Quick back to when you were doing the advising and lobbying, were you now connected with a lot of Congress people from your NAB work? How did you start to build those relationships?
So I had 2 sets of relationships. One was a group of members generally that had been on the opposite side of our NAB positions. So, for instance, there was a highly regarded member of Congress by the name of Howard Berman, who was from California. He was from the Valley, who was a strong proponent of the music industry's position for the performance rights, performance taxes, it was labeled. And he and I were on 180-degree positions, but we both wanted to find a solution. And so I would appear and testify before his committee numerous times, and Chairman Berman could not have been nicer to me. And so even though we disagreed on this position, we built a friendship. And there were others, different staff members of different, I testified before the Senate several times and the House several times. And you just start building these relationships, and people that were in the recording industry, I had good relationships with them. We completely disagreed on positions, but we could go out and have a cup of coffee. And so I had that. And then at the time, Leader McConnell was from Kentucky, and I'm a Democrat. He's a Republican, but we've always been able to work well together from a personal standpoint. And, politically, he's always been incredibly supportive of broadcasters. He's always been great to broadcasters. And he was very helpful to me and different members and Senator Paul. And so, they connected with this office and this office. And I'm a networking Jesse, as we say in Kentucky. I can make friends across different aisles.
I find this also awe-inspiring. You're honestly the first person I've interviewed with this type of extensive experience in DC. When you're testifying in front of a committee, are there people there to help prep you for that? Are you trained for that? I mean, it seems to me that would be just so incredibly intimidating.
Well, yes, to answer the first question, NAB did a great job of briefing. So a couple of days before, you would come to town and you would be pelted in a conference room by various NAB staff members that would ask you a question that was, here's what we expect you're going to be asked about this. And they would ask it in a very difficult way. And they would help you craft your answer in a way that was firm but not disrespectful. Fortunately, I think I had the ability I was younger and I could think faster, and I was able to be fairly agile in my interchange, my dialogue with the members. But I also could respectfully hold the line and disagree I wasn't intimidated by them, but I certainly respected the positions that they were in. Every once in a while, I would get in my shot. For instance, Lyle Lovett and I were testifying together at one point, and before the hearing, they'd all been in the back room having their pictures made with Lyle Lovett. And my position was that radio creates stardom. We create popularity. We create awareness of artists that makes their careers more successful. And, so one of them said, well, Mr. Newberry, what proof do you have of this? I said, well, the fact that you all wanted to have your picture made with Lyle Lovett before the hearing started and nobody else came out and wanted to have their picture made with me is a pretty good indication that Mr. Lovett's stardom is of value to him. And,
That's great.
And that's not something you prep for, but you see that opportunity and make the point. But you got to be careful. The particular member that I was making that point with, we had at least the ability to communicate. He knew I was not meaning it disrespectfully to him, but he also knew that I was making a point to validate what I was saying. And, you just have to, happen in the moment. But yeah, those were interesting, fun days.
Respect, I think, is such an important word. It always, when you look at like Justice Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, how they were great friends. They had different ideas. I'm going to mess up his quote, but it was something about you attack the idea, not the person. And I feel, unfortunately, that we've gotten into a system where we're busy attacking people versus the idea.
Eddie Fritz told me in one of my early days, he said, you need to learn that in Washington, D.C., there are no final victories and there are no final defeats. Your worst enemy on this issue today may be your best friend on another issue tomorrow. So don't ever make it personal. And there's that's how you succeed in Washington, D.C. That's how you used to. It's not that way anymore.
You probably can apply that lesson to a lot of your business dealings as well.
No question.
Especially in an industry like this. So you're recruited. Gordon brings you back to the NAB. As the EVP of Industry Affairs and Strategic Planning, are you doing still a lot of similar to what you did when you were lobbying? Are you still going to hearings and meeting with members?
Not as much, because when you're a staffer, you're putting the members on the panels instead of a staff person. So I'm going to meetings. We had a really good GR team, so they didn't need my role there. I was spending a lot of time on the radio, television, membership education. Plus, we were building the new building, and I had the lead responsibility for the construction project that was proved to be pretty time consuming. And I had the lead responsibility with the automotive industry in terms of how broadcasting and General Motors and Ford and all the major auto manufacturers, what happened in the dashboard. So I had a full plate of stuff my days at NAB were pretty jam-packed.
I've heard I haven't been to the new building, but I hear it's spectacular. And I've heard it's a little bit more than the double wide that you helped wire in your hometown. That's I'm sure a lot. How do you, when you're managing a construction project of that size and an organization that large, that had to have been just another study in trying to manage personalities?
It was, and one of the more, when I got there, I got asked to take the lead on the project, and we were way over budget, and it had not even come out of the ground. And Gordon says, you got to fix this. And so I had been involved on the committee, but now I was given the lead responsibility. In Chachi, there was a wonderful architecture firm that we had worked with. They designed a beautiful building, but I'm looking at this, and there is a custom-made planter for the rooftop of $175,000 for a stainless steel planter. And I said, we're not spending $175,000 for a custom-made stainless steel planter. And the architect says, it's essential because this is a beautiful area. I said, guys, I'm just telling you, we're not going to do it. And I argued, and I finally said, you're missing my point. This organization is made of members that have homes that do not cost anywhere near $175,000. And I said, we're not going to spend that money. And then I chapped them a little bit. I said, if we need to, we'll go to Lowe's and get some planters on some Sunday afternoon and bring them back and put them on the roof. But we're not going to spend $175,000. You know, a $250,000 awning over the front door, it was just, holy cow. So it was just looking at those things and saying, guys, I want nice, but I do not want extravagant. I want something that we're proud of, but I do not want something, we don't need gold-plated faucets in the restrooms, but it needs to be someplace. And what a great team of staff and board members in the real estate committee. We had a great group of people that we could not have gotten that project under control if it hadn't been for that group of people. So kudos to them. I was the conductor of the orchestra at the time, but they did a great job playing their instruments.
It's a very, very impressive project, and congratulations. I want to visit the next time I'm in D.C. In 2020, you were recruited to become the CEO of Q, which creates innovative technologies enabling radio stations to provide enhanced listener experiences and monetize visual advertising through full control of the RDS and HD in-car visual display. It's a very... That's your official, I kind of read it, and sorry if it sounded like I was reading official copy, but it allows you technically to literally see the ad in your in-dash display, or see in-ad, which I think is so incredibly cool, and we've gotten to work with you in full disclosure on a few projects. First of all, tell me a little bit about the recruitment, and then tell me a bit about Q and some of the success you're seeing with it.
Caroline Beasley had been one of the ones responsible for recruiting me to NAB, and we're at a Panera across the street from NAB. She's joint board chair at the time. And she said, how are you enjoying your time at NAB? I said, listen, I appreciate it. Good people. It's going fine. She said, that doesn't sound like a rousing endorsement. I said, great people, but I'm an entrepreneur. I'm not a trade association guy. I said, so I'm going to work through the end of my contract. But I'm going to get back into doing something that's entrepreneurial. I'm not going to retire from NAB, but I'm very appreciative of the opportunity. And she said, do you want to buy more radio stations? I said, no, I think I want to do something that takes the relationships I have and pushes the radio industry forward. And I don't have any idea what that is. And 6 months later, she came, and Beasley's one of the investors in Q. And she came and said, we're making an investment, but they've got to hire a CEO. Are you interested in doing that? And I said, I've got this building that I'm building, and thank you. I really appreciate it, but I just can't leave NAB right now. Let me give you the names of some other people that might be, good candidates. So we didn't talk about it for several months more, and then she comes back and says, when's the building going to be done? And she said, if this works out and if we were willing to wait, would you consider it? And so that's what started the engagement. And it really did check all the boxes for what felt like the right next step for me. It was new for the radio industry. It was a fresh story for the radio industry. It enabled me to work with the people I had the relationships with. I knew the auto industry. I knew the challenges there. So it did kind of feel right. And April Carty-Sip was working alongside me at NAB, and she was able to step into the role. So left a little earlier than I would have anticipated, but I left 2 weeks. Well, I started April 1st, 2 weeks after COVID set in. So that's a great time for a career change, let me tell everybody.
Maybe you should have started on April 2nd.
Yes, I should have. That's right. I should have. But Joe Harb, the founder of Q, Caroline, all the people at Q, they didn't miss a beat with me. And it gave me that time to really think about the friction points. Where were the points of friction that would keep a company from doing business with Q? And that's how I spent the summer of 2020. And then once again, it's all the people you surround yourself with. And I have an incredible team of people at Q, people I love working with every day, and I love what I'm doing.
And it seems to really be effective for the advertisers. I know that you had a study commissioned not too long ago, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but the recall is far greater when you have a cue ad running along your audio commercial than it is when you just hear the audio. It was a significant, like 70% or some big number.
Yeah, it's 63%. That actually is some research that Pierre Bouvard did a few years ago. I can't take any credit for that, but I can sure quote it.
Okay.
But it's a 63% lift in retention when you put a visual with the audio. And, that on average, and that makes sense because, some of us learn audibly, some of us learn visually, but if you combine those two, and it does give radio that visual component that we have never had before. And so while the ad for the local car dealer is playing, if you can look over and see Chachi Chevrolet, you have a much higher likelihood of retaining that. And as I tell people, you guys, Benztown does such a fabulous job at this. I know how to write a good radio ad. I've spent 45 years writing radio ads. I know theater of the mind. I know how to price your offer. I know how to add a sense of urgency. I get it. I know all those things. And you've got to continue to do that. But if you can add a visual on top of it that reinforces what you're saying, it's a pretty significant jump in terms of the retention for the advertiser. And so that's why I'm excited about it.
And I think it's nice too, because how many times we've been driving, I love radio and I love audio, but how many times you've been driving down the road and a number goes by or something, you miss it and you can see it still right there. And I think that recall is so incredibly important, both for the listener and for the advertiser. Is it difficult for a station that's interested? What kind of setup is involved? Is it relatively easy to implement at a station level from a technical standpoint?
Yeah, if the station has the RDS transmitter, which they would have had for, Q doesn't require any unique equipment. We just manage the content that's going into the equipment that most stations already have.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So it's not like you have to have a special Q box. All of our stuff is software, but we're cloud-based, and we put ourselves between the output of the automation system and the input to the RDS encoder or the HD transmitter. And yeah, in the simplest terms, we help you manage what's on the display when something's playing. So if what's coming out of the automation equipment is McDonald's of Southern California, ISKI code 83-12-428, you really don't want that showing up on the dashboard of the car. But we can say when that cart plays, McDonald's, $1.99 Big Macs are back. Or McDonald's, free sausage biscuit. Whatever the message is. So when that commercial, instead of the ISKI code McDonald's of Southern California, we can put a message on there that's much more easily absorbed by the listener. And we can substitute that. And we can do that with cars. We can do it with anybody's spot. So that's what we do. We manage the content. And I think, I had a client say to me the other day, and I really appreciate this. He said, you have gone beyond being a software solution to a business solution. You provide the training, you provide the revenue lift, you provide the programming, and that's where we want to be. I'm not just trying to sell somebody a piece of software to get the song title and artist on the dashboard. I'm really trying to give them the opportunity to program the dashboard like they do the audio on the radio stations, make it super connective.
That's, I think, an incredibly cool technology, and if you haven't looked into it, highly recommend it. We're seeing a lot of stations have success with it, and advertisers have success with it, and I think it's just a new, exciting way as well to deliver, pertinent information and help cut through just all of the different, all the clutter that so many listeners are exposed to throughout all this. And I think probably I respect so many things about you, man. You're such a proponent for the industry and just everything you've done from an entrepreneurial perspective. You're a great speaker. You've lobbied in Congress and been on in hearings. I mean, just so many impressive things. But through it all, you've maintained your ownership in Commonwealth, and you really have. I mean, you are just true radio in your heart. How much of your time, and I know you obviously most of your day is focused towards Q, but how much are you still on a day-to-day with Commonwealth and the stations that Dale runs?
It ebbs and flows. Dale is a guy that has the responsibility all the time. We talk pretty much every day. It's not a report phone call. It's not like we get on the phone at 7:00 every morning. He tells me what we sold yesterday. There's not that, but it's collaboration. I want to make sure we serve our communities, and I want to make sure we run a good business. And if we do those two things, that's really, and a good business meaning, make it profitable for our shareholders, make it where we can be competitive for our employees in terms of their income and their career paths. But I'm a radio guy. I love radio. I love the people in it. I love the technology. But what I really love about radio goes back to when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And I lived in southern Kentucky, and there would be a tornado warning. And people that live in tornado areas don't get too worked up about watches. But when there's a warning, people pay attention because that means there is a tornado. And we know how deadly those can be. And Chachi, I can remember being in the basement of my home listening to the local radio station with an announcer by the name of Gene Collins, who would be just talking to people about the weather. He would be calming people. He would be telling them where the storms were. He would be telling him, okay, go ahead, now's a good time for you to move to an inner room. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't, getting people worked up. He wasn't being dramatic. He was just calmly keeping people company and keeping them safe. That is why I love radio.
That is so well put and probably couldn't be any more timely. I literally was just on a call last week with a friend of ours, Jim Spector, who is the OM for the Summit Cluster in Omaha. And as you know, they just had these horrendous tornadoes go through there and reap all sorts of destruction. And he was right there on the microphone, keeping everyone abreast of the situation. And you're right, nothing replaces that. Internet goes out and...
Yeah, listen, I love great jocks, great jingles. I love fun. I love contest. I love flamethrowing radio stations and Scott Shannon on pirate radio. All this stuff we've talked about, I love it. But at the core, at the end of the day, to be the voice in the radio that is helping people stay safe and calm and being a positive influence in the community. If you would, there's one other story that I tell the people that work with. I say, the day after a disaster, the guy that works down at the local auto manufacturing plant wants to be able to do something, but he doesn't really know what he can do. Maybe they'll take up a donation at work today and he'll give money to the Red Cross, or he'll give blood, or, the person that's, working with livestock doesn't really know what to do. He's just going to go out and farm or get back on his tractor. But as broadcasters, we get to help the community heal. We're not helpless. We are the folks that start healing the community. We're the ones that go to work on the day after a disaster and say, we're going to get through this together. Call us. We need water to send to these people. Help us raise money for this. Coats, whatever it is, we are never helpless. Broadcasters are the glue in a local community that helps at the worst times and entertains at the best times. And what a freaking privilege it is to be one of those guys.
So absolutely well put. Bringing it back around to Q, have you guys done with raising awareness for nonprofits like a radiothon through Q? Could a station use it for that type of application as well? Yeah,
absolutely. You're doing a radiothon, put the message up there, put the story up there, put the logo of the charity that you're working on up there, put the phone number people can call in. After some tornadoes 3 years ago, I saw a station that said, need help, have info, call us, and they put the studio number up. And then the alternating message was the American Red Cross phone number that people could call and make a donation. And the station was live in the studio, taking callers and connecting people. Okay, we need a generator over on South Fork Road because, there's a farmer out there whose power's out in his dairy barn and he's got to get those cows milk and somebody help out. We're doing those type conversations. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching that station use Q to tell people how to get help and how to communicate with the radio station. And I'm like, touchdown, man. That's what it's all about. And even more so, before, when the storms are approaching, people using it to say, tornado warning, take cover now, listen for details, so that somebody's driving down the road and a mom is in the minivan with her children and she's scared and she's wondering if the weather's threatening, and she can tune into the radio station and immediately see that there is a warning and she needs to take cover, as opposed to waiting for the song to end or waiting for the commercial break to end or whatever it is. It's immediately there. Yeah, I'm a radio guy. Can you tell? I love that. And I love that connectivity.
Steve, this has been an absolute treat. I've got one bonus question for you. You've had some amazing mentors, a former governor, Gordon Smith over at the NAB, who's just a pure legend. If you could boil down one thing they've taught you, just a kind of a lesson that you can share with some younger people that are looking to get into the industry, or they're just have gotten started in the industry, what would you say is maybe the best piece of advice a mentor has given you?
I don't know if there's a singular best piece of advice. The common message would probably be, to me, whether it's John Dilley or Jack Sander or Brereton Jones or Gordon Smith or whomever it was, slow down. Let's think about this. The common thing that I would tell you is wisdom comes with age, and there's no shortcut. And so surround yourself with people that are willing to share their wisdom. Don't feel like you have to have all of the answers. Don't feel like saying, I need help to think through something is a sign of weakness. Don't feel like you have to bluff your way through difficult times. On those difficult times, surround yourself with people and say, hey, you got a minute? I need to come over and have a cup of coffee with you because I'm really struggling on how to get through this. Chachi, I'm sitting here and I'm on the edge of being very emotional because I can go through this list of Kerry Newberry, James Newberry, Chuck Anderson, Doug Combs, Freddie Travis, Gordon Smith, Jack Sander, Brereton Jones, all of these people, Michael Fiorelli, all of these people that at different points in my life have invested their time in me. So I guess I would say two things to answer the question, as I've now formulated the answer. To a young person, find people who have wisdom and be comfortable talking to them about your fears, your weaknesses, your anxieties, the things. Go to them with a plan. Don't go to them just as a big bubble of mess, but go to them with a plan and get that. But the flip side to that is, if you are somebody that's been fortunate, please be willing to share your wisdom. Please be willing to take the time and entertain those conversations with that young person that's coming to you needing guidance, that young person that's coming to you needing help. Don't take yours and go home because you've made it. Pay it forward, reinvest in people, share the resources, and build relationships. I guess that's the best thing I would say to somebody.
Steve, thank you for everything you've done for the industry, everything you've done for Benztown, and everything you've done for your community, man. You really are a leader in every sense.
Well, Chachi, thank you. And thank you for what Benztown does for the industry, because you guys do so much to make us all sound better and to put that sparkle into the way a radio station sounds and presents itself. And we kind of lost that art before you guys reminded us of what it is. But to you particularly, the man that always returns every email, it's an amazing thing to watch. You're just such an effective leader for your team. You're a good human being. You're a great friend. And it's a privilege to be able to visit with you today and spend some time talking to you. Thanks for your interest.
Thanks for listening to Chachi Loves Everybody. If you like the show, we hope you leave us a 5-star rating and tell your friends. Make sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This has been a Benztown McVeigh podcast production. Hosted and researched by Dave Chachi Dennis. Executive producer, Darren Silva. Producer and editor, Jake Urbanik. Show coordinator, Estefania Padilla. Marketing and distribution, Suzanne Aksu and Robbie Gessel.